I was telling Kevin how I'm doing announcements this year, and how he was like, oh, it's so hard to get everyone's attention, isn't it? And I was like, no, they start clapping immediately. And he was like, they never did that for me. And he was... So a few things. We found someone's backpack. It's on the ledge back there. We also posted back there are the meeting sheets for Renee Zuckerbrot, Lee Feldman, and Michelle Brower. And Lee's start at 5:30, so definitely after this reading, take a look to see if your name is up there. And the sign-up sheet for Amy William is out at McClurg now, so sign up at dinner, and it'll be out through breakfast tomorrow. Also at 5:30, we're going to have Frisbee. I think Adam described it as ultimate deathmatch Frisbee, and cornhole outside on the lawn. Basketball at Fowler, the open mic reading at 9:30 tonight at Humphrey's dorm, and I believe that's it. So please welcome Sidney Wade.
Thank you so much. It's such a pleasure to be back in this incredible community. Thank you, Wyatt, for the invitation, and thank you all for the warmth that you have shown this year, last year, the generosity and the literary intelligence. It's just wonderful to be here again. I'm going to start with a very early poem. I just this past June went back out to my family homestead in Kansas. My mother's family were Danish. They settled Denmark, Kansas, which is in the middle of, smack dab in the middle of the state. And in the little tiny town, there is a tiny little church made out of limestone, yellow limestone. That's all. Those are the materials they had to work with. There isn't a whole lot of lumber out there. And inside the church is a faithful replica of a clipper ship. It's about this big, this tall, hanging from the rafters. This is a tradition in European seafaring countries. Successful voyages would be celebrated by the offering of a church, a model of a ship to a church, and many of the churches in Denmark are festooned with these things. But there's one in the middle of the most landlocked state in the country, in the New World, out there in Denmark, Kansas. It's called Kirkeskibe, the ship in the church. Wind blows the wheat like water and seeps under the door and curls around the feet of the pews and stirs up some dust in the sunlight and dies in the nave. In this heart of many hearts, we know what it is to rest light as snow on a still night, and to dissolve on the tongue, on the body of an old, old love. And we know the prayer, the dust and the ashes, the darkened face of the prairie as it opens, as it does and does to receive us, and all the small deaths in the evening, and the blackbirds blue and green and gold as oil and as violet after a hard, hard rain, and the rolling shoulders of the hills, the stone graced so thinly with its hopeful mantle, so shallow, no trees, only grass and the bitter streams. And a church hangs still in a quiet corner, offering up its burden of praise. And we know it's the same old ship of fools, old worn, old fragile prairie schooner. I think last year I read some poems from this book, Celestial Bodies, and I'm afraid to repeat myself, so I will read some peculiar love poems. Mouth River. I want to raise some notes from the undermined and fan the rumors at bedtime, the beautiful wordfall that churns up from a ripe center. I want, rises from the fire diaphragm, laps on the shores of the throat, and rides out on the tongue. Tête et amour, immensity and pleasure due, are better than a bank full of pretty money. There's enough beauty in this world to choke a god. Reinhardt. I've been dry many days, Reinhardt. Why don't you come whispering up and loosen that structural tie? I'll go stand by the ochre-colored river and watch for your still blue mouth. I think it's time to put lightning in its place in the blueprint of your veins. I think it's time to cry through the windows and through the house-high weeds. I think it's time to translate the pleasures of being found into a damp, stellar language. I think it's time to dissolve, so I guess I'll pour my all into the vessels of Paradise Manor. Plink, plink, plink. Okay, one more. Our hearts transcend us. The first time he says, I love you, my tongue clicks on my teeth in involuntary dismay. Or is it pleasure? And I wonder what to do. And what is love anyway? And he says, we know what love is, don't we? And I say, yes, but of course I'm bluffing. So let's see. Here are some possibilities. It's a wild attitudinal policy. It's a pretty silly lip trick. It's feeling light and suffering and controlled. It's a body song, a pleasure tower, a mountain of joy, a crucible, a westering thing. It's a powerful antidote to fear. But then there are the awkward flying and all those gauzy questions. It can also be a genuine miscalculation, or maybe group suffocation. It's when you leave your trendier self and your clothes in the fast lane and maybe end up falling and very, very cold. And in the middle of all this, I think, in the absence of zero, there is amplitude, and then turn away to start a bonfire, which is a lot more fun with lighter fluid. Okay, where is this? The Vulgate of Experience. In this tatterdemalion sandwich of life, it pays to pay attention to the light, not to the oligarchic spread of heavy principles or to 4-week traditions. There are multitudes caught in the glare and just as many stuck in a radiant head book. The book says even though we might reflect the bruised glory of all the suns that ever shone down on the earth, mostly everyone's dreaming in a savage room or searching for the beloved in a desert. I admit I, for one, am clouded by experience, though I'm feeling my way into a weird pre-waking from the old parabola of darkness. Some nights I sleep in wild weather where the names of God change furiously. Sometimes I wander in the available light. The wind is always a perilous distraction. On rare, sweet days, I hear a brown, nut-like sound. Inside this sound, you can hear the imagination fluttering. Here, joy whiskers through the main arteries. Here is where, if you hold out your hands, they will be filled. And a little tragic moment. Called Grand Disastery. Moored by fine tethers to certain death, a hornet fizzes on the windowsill. A spider flies to its side to securely bind this abundant harvest. The hornet, in shrill thrall to agony, drills a hole in God's provident breast pocket. In the sublime cold light of this tiny constellation, the bald pulp of the hornet's diminishing hum feeds growing eyes and hungry sockets. The figure is clean, a small black aster hung among the stars. And now we get to the birds, which I'm going to read some new poems. I've been telling everybody, I turned into a birder a couple of years, 2-3 years ago, and I've been writing nothing but poems about birds since. And preparing for this reading, I discovered to my utter astonishment that in my first book, published many, many years ago, the first 3 poems were entitled White Birds, Snowy Owl, and Swan Lake. How well we know ourselves. So I'll read 2 of these early ones. So this is called Snowy Owl. A woman who looked like a snowy owl knocked on my door last winter. A bunch of artificial violets was pinned to her gray woolen coat. She trudged through the snow in high heels, sheathed in opaque plastic boots. Her smile was bright as a blast furnace, and her eyes, behind double-thick glasses, brimmed over with inspiration. "Do you," she began, "ever think about living forever?" "Sometimes," I replied, staring into her yellowed eyes. She then reached in her purse and pulled out a mouse that swung from her gnarled and horny fingertips, dead. "The gift of eternal life is not for mice. It is for us, who know the beauty of death, the light in the blood as it falls to earth, who know, too, the good liquor of loss, blue terror in the fall from a great height, who know cruelty can be beautiful and love a poor relation in this fine world full of contradiction." After this, she smiled more brightly than ever, and with great gentleness and pride restored the dead mouse to her purse. "Do you have any questions?" she inquired. I thought for a moment and said, "Yes. Are you partial to a gamey cassoulet? Perhaps I could persuade you to step in for dinner." She puffed out her chest and glared. The violets shivered. She then wheeled on a sharp heel and marched away. Swan Lake, this poem was inspired by, when I was in graduate school, I found a 1944 edition of Emily Post's Etiquette, which I found absolutely hilarious. One of the chapters was entitled, "Calling on a Lady Who Has No Maid." And the poem just unfolded from there. There's some fanciful birds in here. Swan Lake. Calling on a lady who had no maid, I was forced to furnish my own. In fact, I took a tea set and golden plate and peonies in a silver bowl. "My word," I said to her on arriving, "how those mourning doves do carry on." She peered at me most peculiarly and ushered me into the atrium, where scissor-tailed darts with silver spurs and crescent wrens piped up in tandem. She offered some crickets and Chinese tea, and we chirped through the hour most properly. Then an odd thing transpired. Direct après-tea time, my girl had gathered the mother of pearl. My hostess, half-lidded, began to hum a most remarkable tedium that crept into my dangling earlobes, a shell-pink delicto if I ever heard one. "I had me a paraquat once, sung so pooty I sold my soul to a sailor man." I had never heard so lovely a bird song and fell to my knees in a reverie when a ruby-throated swan approached me, duplicitous heart and more in his eye, a glittering black pool of romance in which I secretly longed to swim. So after a spot of poetic reflection, I removed my jewels and dove in. Okay, more recent birds. This is called killdeer bathing. Distinctive black collar invisible, he wriggles frisky in the drink. He prinks and sprinkles dizzy droplets everywhere in the morning air. Restored, he resumes his chores, the brisk and worried survey of the shore, the skitter, feint, and twist of the natural catastrophist. Whimbrel. There's not much that's true in this poem. A little. Whimbrel. Kin to the limpkin, she whimpers when primping, wears rimless eyeglasses for skimming her primer on swimming. She splashes through grasses, amassing her rations of shrimp, and stands, a fat ampersand, on the sandpaper strand, making eyes at a snipe, fanning the passions of the sandpiper nation. Cardinal. I had a couple of years ago, I had a bald cardinal come to my feeder for a few weeks. He recovered. And then his wife got it. Cardinal. His head isn't red, it's black as a scalded sinner. He's bald and pitiful, but brave, as he picks at his seeds from the eminence of the feeder, a shaved and wincing avian prince at his dinner. What turns a songbird vulturine? Cap too tight? Territorial fight? A terrible flaw in the grand design? A cuckoo pope? Nope. Feather mites. Turkey vultures lack a syrinx, so cannot sing. They do not stink. Their red heads are featherless for cleanliness. They have 3 sets of eyelashes and wash their pinkish legs in rivulets of urine, which stain them white and cool them down. They rule many skies. Generic name, Cathartes, purifier. When they fly, they soar for hours, riding high thermals, gliding on bountiful rivers of air. Tippy in flight, they balance and write, hover and crown. Catholic in their taste for carrion, they are pacific creatures and do not fight or kill their prey. Their feet are clawed but weak, as are their beaks. They are benign and much maligned. This poem is actually about a bat, but he's got wings, so he's in. Glory train. Cleaning house, I find in a dried out flower of brown froth the tiny skeleton of a bat. I set it on a white plate and tweeze debris from its frame. The hand wing bones are thin as veins, a miracle of design, fine almost to vanishing, the ephemeral on which so much depends. The pelvis is small as a pushpin, frailer than eggshell. The fragile vestibule of the ribs is clean and unbroken. It harbors 8 desiccated larvae that had, rather late, hopped aboard this darkly upholstered glory train. The minuscule figure hints at the beautiful old rhyme of moon and ruin, the darkness in which constellated hungers twitch and fly, feed on each other, and die. Indigo Bunting. Blue as paint, blue as flame, blue as blue dawn. There are 2 things you might want to know about that I mentioned in this poem. Emil Nolde, I mentioned, he's a wonderful, wonderful watercolorist, has the most vivid colors of any watercolor you'll ever see. And I mentioned a sky blue dancer, which is the name of a stunningly beautiful blue dragonfly. Okay. Indigo Bunting. Blue as paint, blue as flame, blue as blue dawn, blue as the burn after lightning, blue on fire, blue and a black beak, blue on electric wire, blue as the sky just after dark, blue on the back of the eye, blue as sleep, blue as a sky blue dancer, no bluer, blue as a sunning shark, blue as Nolde's watercolor, blue shot, blue bead, bluer than the deep indigo sea, blue as speed, blue fizz, blue, black blue, dart and sizzle. Birding at the dairy. In Gainesville, the Audubon Society often takes people out to the Hague Dairy, which is a large dairy farm run by the university. We're searching for the single yellow-headed blackbird we've heard commingles with thousands of starlings and brown-headed cowbirds. When the many-headed body arises and undulates, a sudden congress of wings in a maneuvering wave that veers and wheels, a fleet and schooling swarm in synchronous alarm, a bloom radiating in ribbons, in sheets, in waterfall, a murmuration of birds that turns liquid in air, that whooshes like waves on the shore, or the breath of a great seething prayer. Burrowing owl. Very odd, this little cloud in trousers in the sandy fortress favored by prairie dog and gopher tortoise. On the mound at the mouth hole, he scouts around with sibylline yellow eyes and then owl-wise decides to clean house. He dives down and soon great clouds of smudge come flying out, his home now clean as a bone. A diurnal owl, he's upside down and inside out, at ease not in trees, but underground, where his mate broods on her 8 fragile moons in an immaculate burrow whose contours are lined with cow manure. Bird and beast. Some say all birds are feather-brained. Some say they're bright. But I maintain that if you trained your eye on, say, the sandhill crane, you'd see that feeding or in flight, he does not hedge or monetize, unlike the master parasite who Earth's demise will underwrite. Okay. From the new book. Animist Manifesto. Where is God, we ask in haste, and answer slow in winter-paced adagio, in appetite, in thrum and fissure, in pressure, in the deep-set vein, in silence and in marbled sleep, in the garbled dream of working men with far-flung shoulders, in the steady hum of axled tires, in their endless turning and the slow burn of their prose, in the autumn poetry of fire, in the mordant tones of blazery, in fall-stroked polyphonic meadows, in the darkness of the Dorian scale, the shadowed face and tangled dance that trails all music, and its fragrance in the winding sonitude of grief that punctures every day's veneer, in all bodies bound by gravity, in the splendor of the soulfish floating in their water holes, waiting patiently for amplitude, for metaphor, for the song of mind made flesh. Interlude. The never-ending meditation continues this early morning, squirrels on the porch and in the trees. The lake is still, the silence blue. I've belled the cat, made coffee, and am ready with my pencil to accept whatever mind imagines is its music or its body or its gold. I've hung the Niger thistle seed and am waiting for the cloud of goldfinches I hear is near to appear. Such luck. In the larger darknesses of the ground west of sight, I'm shouting at the mountain of silence and depth when an eye opens, and I open my mouth to devour the sound of night, which in time will filter through all that swings or hums. My fist is full of letters, my wrist aches like a drum. Such luck to hold a compendium of resonant voices in the sanatorium of my head, whose guest book is crowded with the highbrow and the lowbrow, and whose overseer in the background prays every day for my bright daughters and the black-blue waters they're swimming through, and all the possibilities they might swallow. And I know my strength and sphere may be slight, but look at this handful of light I found in a crack in the ground. Here, it's for you. Here's a short response to Andrew's craft talk this morning. Form. And now the lake's slate gray, the trees are green-fringed, and deeper in the distance the mountain hulks and presses its blue form, insistent on the eye, absolutely everything at stake at every moment. It's been a little chilly here since I got here. It inspired me to read a winter poem. Solitude. Solitude is silver as yesterday's weather. Below the low winter ceiling of clouds, the slant November sun skittered across the lake and into the house. In 2 weeks, tiny flakes will begin sifting out of the gray sky one by one. Open the door, let the cats in. Now, as I pin wet clothes to the line, idiotically happy in the crisp, clear air, a gray jay boldly alights 5 feet from me and politely asks to be fed. I tell him to wait right there, go into the house, Open the door, let the cats out, and return with bread which he eats from my hand as I fret about lurking cats, quite certain I shouldn't encourage this sort of perilous behavior. Open the door, let the cats in. It isn't lonely with cats and birds and a fire in the fireplace, and on a good day, laundry to hang. Open the door, let the cats out. Poems to write, poets to read, like Lew Welch as he thanks his woodpile and thinks he's turning shack simple, like Hanshan and Wittgenstein, and possibly me. Open the door, let the cats in. Solitude flows in narrow pressured straits as in the Bosphorus, whose green currents are layered and profound and run counter to each other, so that if a fisherman casts his net deep enough, the lower current will tow his boat upstream. Open the door, let the cats out. A minute ago, I heard a gunshot and stepped outside to listen. All I hear now is the slosh of small waves on the rocks and the water dripping onto pebbles from the roof. Open the door, let the cats in. In bright slanted light and on windless days, in utter silence, it becomes clear we all must descend one by one into winter. Open the door, let the cats out. Hybrid. All the new thinking is about energy, says my new lover, as I wonder about the crowd that hovers in the green in-betweenness in my head. The energetic crew who speak unspoken to, who volunteer non sequiturs. When I'm mining for the deeper thing, the regal thing, they substitute gumshoe hoedown or a fine tooth comb, or if I ponder a smart sonnet on the Institute of Forgetting, they'll offer moth-eaten, feather-bedded, meatballed things, then steer me into Beer Harbor and say, yon yon, and leave me sprawled, unhoused, in hybrid doubt about the rough and tumble of this banquet hall, when all I really itch to do is engrave on a golden bowl a soliloquy on the physics of the soul, that hilarious white wave on the tufted dark of the sea. Several years ago, I conceived the brilliant idea of writing a book in one sentence and calling it Run-On. I took pity on the prospective reader after a while and saved a portion of it. This is called Run-On. Caveat emptor, we'll be running on together for a while, and I'll be carving up the spiritual possibilities in the background, and we might find from time to time a reprise of that old sublime and unhappy opera, The Roaring Desire for More, which is, after all, the dire wilderness we all tend to navigate with tender regard for our poor, poor hands. So here's the plan. I'll serve as the bravura conduit to intuition land, and you provide the filthy lucre, and we'll orchestrate a balanced dance, accompanied perhaps by some nuanced romantic fumbling, or maybe even some Christian death threats from the right side of the brain, which is the nurse douloureuse of macaronic verse. Oh, caro babino, now don't you feel better? Not really. That nurse is standing on her histrionic feet and yelling that a Wolfowitz in shit's clothing is marauding in our fold, a vast and uncurtailed misprision of vision. Oh la, le pauvre! He and his pals ace the test of violence and shame every time they take them. Then they stash the crude oil under the bed. What a tired old cliche. They should be taking care of the waifs and the orphans. Instead, they congregate at the mouth of the Bible factory outlet. I ask you, what is this great and golden whirl a-coming to? Or, what is the chief effect of this pageant, as Mr. Stevens, very late of Hartford, asks, as did my great friend Hugh, more newly late of Hartford, gone on New Year's Eve? He strapped on skis and glided over the thinnest, merest whisper of new ice, which failed him, then immobilizing cold gathered him slow in its heavy arms, and now, on this the brighter side of the divide, we're poorer by one vivid, loving, slight and wiry barefoot man, bandanaed, wild-haired, fond of smoke and poems. And I wonder how the lanyard of history will tether this single glazing loss to the catalogue of misery it so surely is compelling in its always forthcoming great long poem. I lived for 2 years in Istanbul, and wrote several poems about them. I think I read a few last year, so I won't read those, but this one I don't think I've read. It's just called My Istanbul. My great blue metropolis of shadow and of molten dream, my city whose fabric is constructed of curious timbers, manhole covers, and nimble historical seams. My city where grit and beauty flash in the windows in transcendent flares that February 4th their slow revelations as great green accelerating mystery muscles up from the depths of the hurrying Bosphorus currents. My schizophrenic city, passionate in its melancholy and its keen acquisitive ache. It glowers brightly in its layers of wool and gray, stone and linens, a splendid symphony in minor key, home to the riven souls and beggars, home to the many instruments of poetry, home to polyspeak, whose pyrotechnic frigidities dazzle the spirit. It's out of control, it's out of this world, and absolutely fine. And I'll finish with a poem called Geep. I think I did read this last year, but I'm going to do it again. A Geep. Does anybody know what a Geep is? Have you ever heard of a Geep? It is an engineered animal, a product of blending the genes of a goat and a sheep. Geep. The music of the sleepy day was ravagingly dull until Michael reeled up a Geep from the depths of his considerable intelligence. A Geep, a wonky blend of goat and sheep, a medical medley, genetic fugue they call Chimera, another wholly enthralling sound we found when Googling Geep, whose enharmonic bleating in the end rings oh so sad. The photo on the screen reveals a downcast baby creature, neither here nor there, two bold and mordant sets of chromosomes whistling fortissimo through its patchwork hide, a botched up map of silken hair and woolly yellow fur, its forlorn droopy ears a study in radical embarrassment. I feel profoundly sorry for this border folly, this lonely little instrument of the ever-expanding notion of what's possible. But then I see we're kin, the little Geep and me. We're marginal ephemera, intoning low, invisible messages at the edges of the known to who knows whom. The difference between us a matter of degree. The poet, of course, a hybrid creature of transport and remorse, an overreacher in semaphore who sounds the gold in the ore, whose pleasure ground is linguistic welter that rides like ice on its own melting to paradise or to a stranger land we don't yet understand. Thank you very much.